We are here to talk about one of our very favorite things, which is the Cook PVI, the Partisan Voting Index, which has been around now for more than 25 years. And Dave, you have dug into this data like no one else and understand it like no one else. So, for those who are not quite familiar with what it is or why they should care about it, can you just give us an overview?
Sure. Well, Amy, you're the OG PVI person because you were around pretty close to the start of when we started putting these scores together. But the Partisan Voting Index is an attempt to measure the partisan lean of every single district and state against the nation as a whole. And although there are a lot of election results that are important for understanding how a district or state performs, at the state legislative or gubernatorial level or Senate results, only the presidential race allows for total comparability across state lines. And so what we do is we take the two most recent presidential election results and we take a weighted average. And so the most recent race, in this case 2024, gets three times as much weight as the second most recent race, 2020. And we take a look at what the national two-party share for each party in the popular vote was. And then we measure what it was in each state and district. It sounds simple enough, but actually calculating the results by district involves some intricate math for counties that are split between districts. And so we've partnered with Dave Leap's Atlas of U.S. Elections. And in the past, we partnered with a firm called Polidata. And so we have commissioned the results by district. And essentially, if a seat has performed, let's say, 4 points more favorable to Democrats in the most recent presidential elections compared to the nation as a whole, then it has a score of D+4. Let's say the national value is right at 50%, but Trump got 55% in a district. On average, it would have a score of R+5. So that's more or less how it works, and we've seen a lot of change over the years.
Yeah, and that's what I want to get into, but that is an excellent explainer. And so I think, sometimes folks look at this and hear R+5, D+16, right? Does this mean that the district is 16 times more Democratic? No, what it means is that if you, as you said, it's a great way to compare all 435 districts against a common uh, result, right, which is the presidential election result, so that if you are looking at a district and deciding, well, is this district actually competitive or not? You've also looked at that and said, yeah, anything that is somewhere between a D+5 or an R+5 is a competitive seat. In other words, these are districts that went for one presidential candidate or the other, but not overwhelmingly so. So, what do we know about those competitive seats? And what about over time? I mean, we know that there are fewer and fewer swing districts. And why is that?
That's right. Well, in the first iteration of the Cook Partisan Voting Index, there were 160 districts out of 435 that were between R+5 and D+5, which is, I like to think of those as the partisan 40-yard lines on a football field. Within
Mm.
that range, that's where most of the competitive races take place. And, back in 1997 or 1999, were there competitive races outside that range? Sure. There were a lot of Democrats, and we'll get into this, but there were a lot of Democrats and Republicans who were defying the partisan leans of their districts at the presidential level. But most of the races have always taken place, most of the ones that the parties spend a lot of money on, take place within that D+5 to R+5 range. And that number, 160 of those seats, that was higher than the number of solidly Republican districts, R+5 or more, which was 153, and the number of pretty solidly Democratic districts, which was 122. And over time, a combination of self-sorting, in other words, the tendency of like-minded voters to cluster in certain areas. I would argue the kind of the information, the prevailing informational ecosystem in given regions of the country that kind of push softly committed voters towards the dominant viewpoint wherever they live, and then
Right.
also redistricting. They've all kind of worked hand in hand to eviscerate the count of swing seats. And in 2019, we saw that hit an all-time low of just 71, which was a 57% decline from the 164 that we had in 1999. And we saw the number of swing seats tick up after 2020 because there were a lot of districts, for example, in Texas, uh, or districts in suburbs around the country that became less reliably Republican than they had been. And then redistricting tamped that number back down to 82 as the parties that controlled redistricting drew predominantly safe seats. And in this year's PVI report, we saw the number of swing seats rebound slightly to 87. And most of that change was coming out of the D+5 or more column. And what happened is that Donald Trump made inroads with working class non white voters. And some of the biggest PVI shifts that we saw were in majority Hispanic and majority non white urban districts in general. Most of those are safe Democratic seats, but a few of them fell below that D+5 threshold, which resulted in a handful more swing seats. And it's important to note that 87 number, that's still only a fifth of the House.
That's right. So that the actual, number of competitive seats has continued to shrink. But as you said, we are also becoming, in some ways, less geographically polarized, at least when it comes to districts that are overwhelmingly um, non-white, districts that have a significant minority population. So can you give us some examples of that? Places where Trump did considerably better in 2024 than he did in 2020?
For sure. And, when we look at the top 25 moving districts, the top 25 that moved left over the course of the last couple of years, and the top 25 that moved right, the district that moved the farthest left only shifted by 4.1 points, but there were 37 congressional districts that moved right by more than 4 points. And it was a story of racial depolarization where Donald Trump
Mm-hmm.
was making big strides in places like LA, in New York City, in non competitive states, non competitive districts, but some familiar names on that list. Alexandria Ocasio Cortez's district actually had the biggest increase in Trump's vote share between 2020 and 2024. Richie Torres's district in the Bronx, similar story. And these districts went from, in AOC's case, D+27 to D+19. In Torres's case, D+35. It used to actually be the most Democratic district in the country, to D+27. But there were also places that are minority majority that are getting a little bit too close for comfort for Democrats. For example, Vicente Gonzalez's district in Brownsville and McAllen, Texas, went from D+9 to even. And now Democrats are having to work really hard to hold on to that seat that they traditionally won by a mile. Or look at some of the districts in South Florida that used to be safe Democratic seats. And in fact, when Governor DeSantis and Republicans adopted a congressional map in 2022, they basically wrote those seats off. Well, now a number of them, including those held by Jared Moskowitz, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, they are becoming, Lois Frankel, they are becoming more evenly divided to the point where maybe in a strong Republican year, those could be in play.